The dining room glowed with soft golden light, the kind Claire had carefully arranged with candles and a string of bulbs draped across the window. She wanted everything perfect for Daniel's 40th birthday. The roast in the oven, the neatly folded napkins, the laughter of friends gathering to celebrate a man she had loved for half her life. The neighbors filled the space with easy chatter. Glasses clinked, jokes circled, and Daniel basked in the center, his grin stretched wide. Yet from where she stood, pouring wine into a guest's glass, Claire caught the edges of something brittle in his smile. He laughed too loudly, his hand tightening on the back of his chair as if holding himself upright. When the moment came for the toast, Claire rose with trembling hands, her voice warm but uncertain. "To my husband," she said, eyes fixed on him. 40 years young, still charming everyone in the room. The guests cheered, raising glasses, but Daniel's gaze slid away from hers, fleeting and guilty. The sound of their laughter filled the house, but inside Claire's chest a heaviness pressed harder. She had spent weeks planning this night, determined to make it special, to remind them both of the bond they once had. Yet the more she watched him, the more she felt that bond thinning like worn thread. As the evening stretched on, Claire drifted. Between conversations, her smile painted her mind elsewhere. Something in Daniel's demeanor gnawed at her. The way his eyes darted toward the door whenever footsteps echoed, the way he stiffened when someone mentioned family. It was then, just as she began to convince herself she was imagining it, that the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the chatter, sharp and unexpected. Claire's breath caught. Daniel's hand, mid-lift with his glass, froze. She moved toward the door, her pulse quickening, unaware that the next guest to step inside would unravel the carefully woven threads of their marriage. The door opened to reveal a woman Claire did not recognize at first. She was younger, polished, with hair that shimmered under the porch light, and a smile too confident for a stranger. In her hands, she carried a small, carefully wrapped gift. "Daniel," the woman said, her voice low and warm, as if his name belonged only to her. For a moment, the room fell away. Claire caught the flicker in Daniel's expression, surprise, quickly masked by a strained grin. His throat worked. As he swallowed hard, his hand tightening around the stem of his glass. "Eliza," he murmured, stepping forward a little too quickly. He took the gift from her hands, their fingers brushing with a familiarity that made Claire's stomach twist. No one else seemed to notice. The neighbors laughed on, raising glasses, continuing conversations as though nothing unusual had happened. But Claire saw it. The dart of Daniel's eyes toward her, the faint tremor in his smile. "An old friend," Daniel explained, his tone light, almost rehearsed. "Eliza and I worked together years ago." Eliza's gaze lingered on him longer than necessary before she turned politely toward the others. Claire's chest constricted. She forced a smile, but her pulse hammered in her ears. She moved back into the dining room, every step heavy, her world narrowing around the image of Daniel clutching that box. Through the evening, Eliza blended, seamlessly among the guests, her laughter melodic, her charm undeniable. But whenever she looked at Daniel, something unspoken passed between them. A memory, a secret. Claire caught each flicker, each silent exchange, and felt herself unraveling. Her friends remained blissfully unaware, too consumed with wine and conversation to notice the storm brewing in her chest. To them, it was a birthday like any other. To Claire, it was the beginning of a fracture she could no longer ignore. When the night ended and guests trickled out, Claire's eyes fell on the unopened gift sitting neatly on the table. Its presence throbbed like a wound. The house grew still once the last guest departed, their laughter and footsteps fading into the night. The glow of the candles seemed harsher now, shadows stretching long across the walls. Claire stood by the table, her eyes fixed on the unopened gift, her pulse hammering with unspoken questions. Daniel busied himself with stacking glasses, humming under his breath as if the evening had been flawless. But Claire could not let it rest. "Who is she?" The words cut through the silence, sharper than she intended. Daniel froze, then forced a smile as he turned. "I told you, an old colleague. Nothing more." She didn't look like nothing, Claire pressed, her voice trembling. The way she said your name, the way you held that box, Daniel, don't lie to me. His eyes narrowed, his grin faltering. You're overreacting. She came to wish me well. Isn't that what birthdays are for? You're letting your imagination run wild again. Again. The word struck her like a slap. He had used it before, in arguments when her suspicions brushed too close to something real. He stepped toward her, hands open, voice lowering into a soothing tone that felt too polished. Claire, listen. We've built a life together. Don't ruin it by inventing stories. Do you really want to spoil tonight over some woman I haven't seen in years? But the softness in his voice no longer comforted her. It rang rehearsed, as though he had said it before, maybe many times to her or to someone else. The warmth she had always clung to now felt like smoke, curling around lies she could not see but could finally sense. Claire turned away, her hands trembling as she reached for the gift. The box seemed to pulse in the dim light, daring her to open it. Behind her, Daniel's jaw tightened. His charm cracked just for an instant, revealing something colder beneath. Sleep never came. Claire lay staring at the ceiling, Daniel's even, breathing beside her sounding too controlled, too practiced. By dawn, she slipped from bed and crept downstairs. The unopened gift still sat on the table, its presence like a weight pressing on her chest. But it wasn't only Eliza haunting her. It was Daniel himself. She moved to the study, a room Daniel rarely let her linger in. The desk drawers opened with hesitant creaks. At first, she found the ordinary clutter of a life shared, receipts, postcards, half-used pens. But deeper inside, tucked beneath folders, she uncovered fragments that made her pulse race. Old photographs. Daniel on supposed business trips. But the backgrounds didn't match the destinations he'd described. A mountain lodge he'd claimed was Seattle was unmistakably Canadian. A bar he'd called Chicago had signage in Spanish. Claire's fingers trembled as she traced the dates written on the backs. They aligned with times he'd been absent during moments she needed him most. Her father's funeral, their daughter's school play. He hadn't just lied about women. He had lied about where he had been and why. Beneath the stack of photos was a yellowed envelope, its paper stiff with age. Inside lay a birth certificate, Daniel's. Only it wasn't the name she knew. The surname was different, unfamiliar, like a life erased and rewritten. Her breath hitched. She dropped into the desk chair, the room spinning. Who had she married? For 20 years she had believed in their story, the boy from a small town who worked his way up, the man who built their life brick by brick. But here was proof of shadows, gaps, inconsistencies, secrets carefully buried. When Daniel appeared later, yawning and casual, she hid the documents in the folds of her robe. She forced herself to smile, to pour his coffee as though nothing had changed. But inside, her certainty had cracked open. It was no longer about an affair. Something darker lived beneath Daniel's charm, and Claire could feel it breathing closer with every lie. The tension thickened like smoke as evening settled over the house. Claire could no longer hold her silence. The photographs, the false names, the gnawing certainty that her husband was not the man she thought he was. It all pressed against her chest until the words spilled out. "Daniel," she said, her voice shaking, "I know you've been lying about where you've been, about who you are. I found the papers." For a moment his expression flickered, then smoothed into calm composure. He set his fork down deliberately, leaning back in his chair. "Papers, Claire, listen to yourself. You sound insane." "I'm not insane." Her voice rose sharper than she intended. "I saw the photographs, the birth certificate. Who are you, Daniel? Who have I been married to all this time?" He stood, circling the table, placing his hands on her shoulders with exaggerated tenderness. His grip was firm, almost too firm. "You're tired," he murmured. "You've always had an overactive imagination. You twist little things into monsters. Do you want to ruin everything we've built because of some old papers you don't understand?" His tone dripped with patience, but underneath was steel. Claire felt her breath catch, her certainty slipping. Had she misread the photos? Could there be explanations she hadn't considered? He tilted her chin toward him, his eyes locking onto hers with disarming softness. I love you. Haven't I given you a good life? Haven't I been here for you? Think about our children, about our friends. Do you really want to tear all that apart over paranoia? Her throat tightened. The weight of his words pressed harder than his hands. Every protest inside her faltered, her mind fogged by years of trust, love, and the comfort of shared history. Still, beneath the haze, the unease lingered. His affection felt less like reassurance and more like shackles. She nodded faintly, though doubt burned in her chest like fire. He smiled, satisfied, kissing her forehead as though sealing the lie into her skin. The morning light was pale and brittle when Claire stepped outside to fetch the mail. Her mind still reeled from Daniel's words the night before. Tender, suffocating, manipulative. Each phrase echoed, twisting inside her until she questioned whether her doubts were madness or truth. Claire, a voice called softly. She turned to see Mrs. Holloway, the elderly widow from next door, leaning over her garden fence. Her eyes darted toward the house before settling on Claire with an uneasy intensity. I shouldn't say anything, Mrs. Holloway began, lowering her voice. But I've been worried. A few weeks ago I saw Daniel, Claire froze. Saw him? Doing what? The old woman hesitated, wringing her hands. Meeting a woman. Late at night, out by the corner near the oak trees. I think it was the same one from the party. Eliza, isn't it? The name hit Claire like a stone. She tried to steady her breathing. You're certain it was her? Mrs. Holloway nodded. Certain. And there's more. That same week I heard shouting from your house, loud, angry. I almost called the police, but then it stopped. I told myself it was just a quarrel. But now with that woman showing up here, her words trailed off, leaving the weight of implication hanging in the air. Claire's stomach twisted. She wanted to reject it, to defend Daniel as she always had. But the image of him clutching Eliza's gift, the practiced denials, the lies about his past, they all surged forward like pieces of a puzzle snapping into place. Thank you, Claire whispered, her voice tight. I needed to hear that. Mrs. Holloway's eyes softened with pity. Be careful, dear. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we know least. As Claire walked back into the house, her heart pounded. The walls seemed narrower, the silence heavier. This was no longer about whispers of infidelity. Mrs. Holloway's words hinted at something deeper, darker. A betrayal that stretched far beyond another woman's touch. The gift sat untouched on the corner of the dining table, its neat wrapping mocking her every time she passed. For days, Claire avoided it, convincing herself that opening it would only prove her paranoia. Yet Mrs. Holloway's whisper lingered. I saw him meeting her. I heard shouting. That evening, when Daniel claimed he had a late meeting, Claire knew her chance had come. She locked the front door, drew the curtains, and set the small box before her. The paper crinkled beneath her hesitant fingers, the bow slipping loose as though it had been waiting all along. Inside lay no trinket, no cologne, no gift befitting a milestone birthday. Instead, there was a photograph, folded once and stained along the edges. Claire unfolded it carefully and gasped. A young man stared back at her. His face was bruised, his eyes swollen, and a thin streak of dried blood marred his temple. He looked no older than 20, frozen in some violent memory, and at the bottom corner, smeared faint but unmistakable, was a blotch of blood that had seeped into the paper itself. Claire's stomach lurched. She pressed a hand to her mouth, bile rising. Why would Eliza give Daniel this? Who was the man in the photograph? And why did it reek of something so deliberate, so damning? On the back, scrawled in sharp ink, were 2 words, Remember me. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped it. The living room spun around her, the shadows lengthening, pressing close. This wasn't about an affair anymore. This was blackmail or revenge, and Daniel was at the center of it. Claire staggered into the kitchen, clutching the photograph against her chest. Her mind reeled with images of Daniel's false smiles, his evasions, his tightening grip when she pressed too hard. What had he done to that young man? What had he hidden all these years? The front door creaked. Tires crunched in the driveway. Daniel was home. Claire shoved the photograph back into the box, her heart pounding so loudly she feared he could hear it from outside. She forced herself to breathe, to stand. to mask the terror that rattled her bones. The house lay cloaked in silence. The clock ticked past midnight, each chime striking Claire's nerves like a hammer. She sat in the darkened living room, the unopened gift box on the table between her trembling hands. Upstairs, Daniel's footsteps creaked across the floorboards, then stilled. She waited, her heart pounding in rhythm with the silence. When he finally descended the stairs for a glass of water, she spoke. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Daniel, we need to talk." He froze at the bottom step, his silhouette rigid in the dim glow of the lamp she switched on. "Now, Claire, it's late. Sit down." Something in her tone left no room for argument. Daniel sank into the chair across from her, his jaw tight. Claire slid the box toward him, her eyes unblinking. "Eliza brought this." I opened it. "Who is he, Daniel?" "Who's the boy in that photograph?" For a moment he said nothing. His hand hovered above the box, then fell back to his lap. A flicker of panic flashed in his eyes before he smothered it with a smirk. "Eliza's obsessed. She wants to destroy me, Claire. Yes, I had an affair. There, you have your confession. But it's over. She's vindictive, trying to twist the past into something it wasn't." Claire's throat tightened. "So you admit it?" "The affair," Daniel leaned forward, his tone sharpening. "What does it matter? It meant nothing. You're the one I built a life with. You, Claire? Don't throw everything away because of some bitter woman." But she didn't flinch. She tapped the photo. "This isn't just bitterness. You know him? You knew exactly who he was. Tell me what happened." For the first time, Daniel's mask slipped. His voice dropped, quieter, harsher. He was trouble. Always around, always pushing. One night things got out of hand. A fight, that's all. People get hurt. His eyes gleamed in the half-light, a coldness seeping through. "It wasn't my fault." Claire's blood ran cold. The air between them thickened until she could barely breathe. This wasn't just infidelity. It was violence buried beneath charm and excuses. Daniel rose suddenly, looming over her, his fists clenched. "You don't understand. You've never understood. You think you want the truth, but the truth will tear you apart." Claire held her ground, though terror gnawed at her spine. For the first time she saw not her husband, but a man unmasked, dangerous, unrepentant, and ready to strike at anything that threatened his secrets. The living room air thickened with Daniel's fury, his shadow stretching across the floor like a predator ready to strike. Claire's heart thundered, but she stood her ground, refusing to shrink beneath his looming frame. "You think you can corner me with this?" Daniel hissed, pointing at the photograph on the table. "You think you know me? You know nothing, Claire. Nothing." His voice cracked with venom, and before she could react, his hand lashed out, striking the photo box to the floor. The contents scattered, the blood-stained picture sliding across the rug. Claire gasped, stumbling back, but Daniel's eyes burned with wild desperation. He grabbed her wrist, squeezing until pain shot up her arm. "You'll stay quiet," he snarled. "You'll protect this family like you always have. Do you understand?" Years of suppressed fear surged into Claire's chest. She remembered every night she had swallowed her doubts, every moment she had let his charm pacify her questions. "No more, let me go," she shouted, twisting free. Daniel's rage erupted. He shoved her against the wall, his face inches from hers, breath hot with fury. "You'll ruin everything. Do you want them to drag me away? Do you want our life destroyed?" Tears burned in her eyes, but something inside her hardened. Her hands pushed against him, shoving with a force she didn't know she had. Daniel staggered back, striking the corner of the table, his glass shattering to the floor. He roared, lunging again, his fist swinging wildly. Claire ducked, fear fueling her strength. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy candlestick from the mantel, and held it out between them. "Stay back," she screamed, but Daniel didn't stop. His eyes were wild, his control broken. He charged, and in that moment, instinct took over. Claire swung. The candlestick connected with a sickening crack. Daniel collapsed to the floor, his body sprawling against the fragments of glass and spilled wine. The room fell silent except for Claire's ragged breathing, the birthday decorations fluttering in the draft like cruel reminders of what the night was meant to be. She stood trembling, the candlestick slipping from her bloodied hands. Daniel lay motionless, his 40th birthday ending not with celebration, but with tragedy. The wail of sirens split the night, sharp and merciless. Claire staggered back from Daniel's crumpled body, her chest heaving, the candlestick lying slick with blood at her feet. The neighbors' voices drifted in through the open window. Frantic, frightened, hurried. She had no strength to answer them, no words left to explain. Red and blue lights spilled across the curtains as patrol cars screeched to a halt outside. Doors slammed, boots pounded against pavement. A commanding voice cut through the chaos. Police. Open the door. Claire's hands trembled as she fumbled with the lock. When it finally clicked, the door swung open and 2 officers rushed inside, weapons drawn. Their eyes swept the scene, the shattered glass, the toppled furniture. The bloodied man sprawled across the floor. "Ma'am, step back," one officer ordered, guiding her toward the wall. She obeyed numbly, her knees barely holding her weight. Daniel groaned faintly, his eyes fluttering. He was alive, battered, broken, but alive. The sight should have brought her relief, yet dread coiled deeper in her stomach. Alive meant he could still twist the story, still cast her as the villain. "What happened here?" the younger officer demanded. Claire opened her mouth, but only a strangled sound escaped. The words caught in her throat, tangled in years of silence and fear. She wanted to shout the truth, about Eliza, about the photograph, about the violent man behind the mask. But all she could do was stare at Daniel, his blood pooling on the rug. Paramedics pushed through the doorway, kneeling beside him. Their gloves glistened under the flashing lights as they checked his pulse, lifted his head, pressed cloth to his wounds. Daniel's eyes flicked open just long enough to find hers. Even broken, even restrained, his gaze carried accusation. "You did this," he rasped, his voice barely audible but sharp enough to pierce her chest. Claire turned away, tears burning her eyes. Outside, the neighbors huddled in clusters, their faces pale under the strobe of police lights. The birthday banners still swayed gently in the breeze, cruel in their festivity. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and polish, its solemn air heavy with judgment. Claire sat rigid in the front row, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as Daniel was led into the courtroom. He wore a pressed suit, but the bruises still mottled his skin, his wrists chained. Even in shackles, he carried himself with defiance, chin lifted, eyes flashing toward her like blades. The trial unfolded like a cruel play, each act peeling back layers of the man she once believed she knew. The prosecutor painted Daniel as a master of deception, not only a husband who strayed, but a man who lived a double life. Financial ledgers surfaced, revealing years of hidden debts and laundered accounts. Witnesses spoke of shady deals and business trips that had nothing to do with work. Then came Eliza. She stood tall on the witness stand, her voice steady as she recounted the affair. Yet she also revealed something darker, how Daniel had once confessed to her in a drunken rage about a fight with a young man years earlier, a fight that went too far. The photograph she delivered on his birthday was entered into evidence, the stains still visible. Claire's stomach churned, but she didn't look away. Each word, each revelation struck her like a hammer, shattering illusions she had protected for decades. She remembered all the times she had dismissed her instincts, all the nights she had silenced her doubts to keep peace. Now those buried suspicions rose in public, dissected under the cold lights of justice. The defense tried to twist the story, painting Daniel as a devoted family man driven to desperation by a manipulative mistress. But his own testimony betrayed him. On the stand, Daniel's charm cracked. His voice sharpened. His eyes blazed with the same venom she had seen that night. The jury saw it too. Claire sat motionless as the verdict rang out. Guilty. The word reverberated through the chamber, final and irrevocable. Daniel slumped, fury etched across his face, yet powerless for the first time in their marriage. Strangely, Claire felt lighter. Betrayed, yes. Shattered undeniably. But somewhere in the wreckage was liberation. The truth she had been denied for so long had finally broken free. The key turned easily in the lock, and the door swung open to the house that had once felt like a sanctuary. Claire stepped inside, the familiar scent of wood polish and faded roses greeting her. Yet the air felt different now, emptied, stripped of the tension that had long clung to these walls. For years, silence had been her enemy. It had filled the spaces after arguments, after questions Daniel refused to answer, after nights she cried quietly into her pillow. But now, standing in the stillness, she realized this silence no longer suffocated. It cleansed. She moved slowly through each room, her fingertips brushing over photographs on the walls. In every image, Daniel's smile seemed sharper, his arm curled around her like possession instead of love. She traced her own younger face, eyes full of trust, and whispered an apology to that woman, the one who hadn't known how much of her life would be built on lies. In the bedroom, his side of the closet remained half full, shirts neatly hanging, shoes lined with precision. Claire sat on the edge of the bed staring at them, grief tightening her throat. She mourned the man she thought she had, the life she believed was real. But she also mourned herself, the years lost, the doubts swallowed, the voice silenced. And yet beneath the mourning something fragile stirred. Freedom. She rose, opening the window. A cool breeze swept into the room, carrying the faint scent of grass and rain. The curtains fluttered, light pouring in as though the house itself was finally breathing. For the first time in decades, Claire did not feel caged. She closed her eyes and whispered Daniel's name, not in longing, but in farewell. Then she whispered her own firmly, as if reclaiming it. The silence wrapped around her once more. Not heavy, not cruel, but steady. It was the sound of a woman who had survived, who had broken the chains of deceit, who could finally live as herself.